Great. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us for today's session and what's new in body-worn camera and related technology. My name is Carrie Shelton, and I'm the Body-Worn Camera Training and Technical Assistance Project Manager for BJA's Body-Worn Camera Policy and Implementation Program. As a reminder, for this session and all sessions associated with Body-Worn Camera Training and Technical Assistance National Meeting, the points of views or opinions expressed by the presenters herein do not necessarily represent the official position or policies of the U.S. Department of Justice. If you have any technical difficulties during this session, please feel free to reach out to us via the chat function or email bwctta@cna.org. So thank you for that. And now we can go ahead and begin our session on body-worn camera technology. For this session, it's going to be facilitated by our body-worn camera Senior Advisor, Tom Woodmansee. Also participating in this session is Assistant Chief Dinesh Patil from Montgomery County, Maryland, Director Eddie Reyes, and Elliot Harkavy, who is our body-worn camera technology advisor. Thank you everyone for your participation in this session. We sincerely appreciate it. With that, I'll go ahead and pass it off to Tom. Thanks, Tom.
Great, thanks Carrie, and welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time for this session. I'm really excited for this session. I always learn something when hearing from experts, and I actually think we have some of the best right now on this panel in the country for this discussion. A little bit of background about myself. As Carrie mentioned, I'm a senior advisor for CNA and with the body-worn camera program. I work on various projects with CNA around the country, a lot of different police agencies, and I've had the fortune to be involved with body-worn camera for several years now, and we've got, I believe, over 420 agencies involved, so a lot of information, a lot more than I would have ever imagined when I first started working with body-worn cameras and the technology accompanying it. So I'm a retired police officer. I was with Madison Police Department, Wisconsin for 25 years, where I had a variety of different roles. And I just want to, highlight that this is going to be an interactive discussion. We want your questions to come in. You'll find that this panel is fun, very knowledgeable, and they'll feed off of each other. And we'll have questions stimulated from them, I'm sure, on what they're talking about. So from my perspective on technology, we could probably do this block tomorrow, and it might change because technology changes so rapidly. And I recall when I was a lieutenant for my police department and was in charge of training, there were two topics that the officers dreaded the most when we did in-service training. It was updates with policy and updates with technology. But we know body-worn cameras far more than just new technology. It has so many impacts for policing and for our community. And I think more and more police leadership and officers are recognizing the importance of this technology. So I wanted to start off by just having the panel introduce themselves, and please take your time, gentlemen, provide your backgrounds, and then we'll dive into some of the questions. So Chief, why don't we start with you, Dinesh?
Sorry, good afternoon. Dinesh Patil, I'm an Assistant Chief of the Montgomery County Police Department in Maryland. We have a sworn force of about 1,300 officers, about 700 support staff. We're located right outside of our nation's capital, which provides some interesting and different challenges. And quick background on me, I've been a cop for almost 27 years, and I've had a wide variety of opportunities, not just experience, but opportunities to work, for a long time in plain clothes and do enforcement and investigations, and appreciate all that that is, and have also had one foot in technology pretty much my whole career, starting with the first KDT in my car that was screwed down to a piece of plywood. And I was just thrilled that I had something to run around with and run tags. So I've been involved in a lot of the evolution of technology and policing over the years, and was certainly part of our department when body-worn camera I was involved when we said we're not going to do it yet, we're not going to be early adopters, and Ferguson happened, and we lit the fuse on jumping in both feet, for better or for worse. And have had a great distinction of working with Chief Eddie Reyes, who's on our panel, also from National Capital Region, and many others, and hope I can just bring some experience today that we've gone through, some struggles that we've had, some wins. You know, I'll be the first one to say we have a pretty good budget and we have a pretty good infrastructure underneath us. So it made some of those things easier. But hopefully I can bring something to the table in the conversation that it's worthwhile for you to spend an hour with us today. So thanks for having us.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate having you. And Director Reyes, why don't we turn to you?
Thank you, sir. My name is Eddie Reyes. I'm currently the Director of 911 in Prince William County, Virginia, one of the municipalities around the National Capital Region. But prior to that, I had worked with the City of Alexandria, Virginia, where I retired at the rank of Senior Deputy Chief. And I was there for 25 years, and I've known Dinesh, I swear, for 27 of those years that he's been working. And so all the experiences and the background that he talked about, I've either been with him or close by in a lot of those deployments. I'm probably the person with the most seniority on this panel as far as law enforcement experience and technology deployment experience. I worked with Elliot while he was at COG, and he and I worked with a lot of projects. But the thing that's important here is that I helped launch Alexandria, Virginia's body-worn camera program back in 2014, when we almost had a Ferguson moment. We all have our significant events in each of our municipalities that, like Dinesh said earlier, even if you're not thinking or you're not ready to go to cameras, as soon as you have a major incident like that, all of a sudden, $750,000 program is dwarfed in comparison to a $2 or $3 million lawsuit. And then all of a sudden, the cameras become very affordable. So that was my experience there. And then as I also worked with the Amtrak National Police Force, in which they have police officers across the entire United States. Most of them work by themselves on platforms. And of course, having a camera to tell their story in the event that they're not able to became a very useful tool for that organization. And I helped them as they were going through the research of their body-worn camera program. And now as the Director of 911 in Prince William County, I work daily with the police force here in the county, a police force of about 700 officers, and all of them are outfitted here with body-worn cameras throughout 3 district stations. So quite a bit of experience, and I'm just honored to be on this panel with everyone here.
Thank you, Eddie. We're happy to have you as well. And Elliot, why don't you wrap up with some background about yourself?
My name's Elliot Harkavy. I'm the technology advisor to the BWC TTA program. I've been with the program for almost 3 years now. Prior to that, as Director Reyes mentioned, I was with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, coordinating police agencies around the DC area. And during that time, I had the pleasure to work with Chief Patil and Director Reyes, who are both local and national thought leaders on law enforcement technology. So very much looking forward to this discussion.
Thanks, Elliot. And I'll just note that Elliot is one of those people who, if he doesn't know the answers, he's a vast resource. He'll find out. And I know that he turns to Director Reyes and Chief Patil at the top of his list for go-to people. So let's just start off with a kind of a general question to the group. And Eddie, I'm going to ask you to do a mini case study after this, so don't go too deep into that. But why don't we just start off on your overall experiences and observations with body-worn camera and related technologies, how it's evolved from your experiences, where we are now, and where you think it might be headed as well. So Eddie, let's start with you on this one, if you don't mind, sir.
Okay, sure, no problem. So I think from where it evolved, just to give you an idea, when I started with cameras in a police car, it was a full VHS, the type that news reporters normally carry on their shoulder, and it took up my entire passenger seat of my cruiser, and I was wired all over the place. When I got out of the car, of course, I was only an in-car video camera. And the evolution to what we have today, where, it's live streaming on 5G, it is activated by different triggers of different sorts. So I've seen the evolution go, full speed. The thing about it is back then when I started working with cameras in the vehicle in the early 90s, it was a nice to have. You could have a choice whether or not you have one or not. And now you fast forward 30 years later, and now it's a must have. I used to say back in the day that I would almost leave the police station without my portable radio. Without my gun before I would leave without my portable radio. And now I think the same could be said about the body-worn camera. I would venture to say that most officers today would say, I can almost go to work without any tool with the exception of my body-worn camera. So they proliferated, I think, to that level of just needing to be on your body at all times. It's just that level of importance.
Thanks, Eddie. You just noted what was said on a previous panel that the sheriff mentioned that if you were to pull all of his deputies, they would put their body-worn camera as their most important tool on their belt to defend their action. So
Exactly.
seeing more and more of that. Dinesh, you want to touch on this a little bit with your experiences on how body-worn cameras evolved, where it's headed, and what you'd like the group to know from your experiences in related technology?
Sure. I think one, again, we went from not wanting to be an early adopter to pedal to the metal, let's do it. And that came with some challenges because, we wanted to go into this where we let other people make mistakes and have all the pains that go with it, learn from those, and then, be more efficient in the process. So I think we did a good job developing our policy, and I know Eddie's going to talk about policy a little bit later, but, I think that's critical to, I think you have to have good policy, you have to have good training, and you have to have good accountability. And that accountability potentially needs to have discipline incorporated with it. I think one of the big things, again, from a technology standpoint, we almost had it easy. We had a robust fiber network throughout our county. We had a budget that had the capability of standing this program up. We have probably 900-ish officers that have body worn. Each one of them has 2 cameras, so they always have one while the other one's uploading. So, we have some depth there. We did a good job negotiating with our vendor, so that was great. But then it starts spinning into the little, or the tangents that you maybe don't think about right out of the gate. I think I'm a skier, and so having a GoPro on my helmet is something I do all the time. But at the end of the day, I'm not subject to, Public Information Act, and it's not evidence, it's just me usually crashing. And so I think thinking about what if you go down this road, and I think we're all going to be going down this road if you haven't already, what is it going to mean? What resources will you need, and procedures and policy in place reference to public information? When do you release the video? When do you don't release video? Do you have redaction capability or specialists to hire? The technical staff that you may need, because they're cops and it's technology, which means it's going to break, or at some point it's going to need attention. So it definitely has been, I would say it is not an easy lift. I think the technology is almost the easiest part of it. The cameras, are reliable. I'll certainly trumpet cloud-based services that, you don't have to worry as much about, the cybersecurity end of things or ease of use, as long as you have that connectivity. But I'll always say, I understand that we come from a very financially capable budget and capability, and not everybody may have that. But there's a lot more to just slapping a camera on a cop, and then just say, oh, well, we'll be okay now. We have certainly struggled. We are in a very strong union environment here. There was a lot of concern with this change. It was something new, and that people were worried about what the camera was going to capture. Well, our policy basically is, if once you get the call for service, you activate. And yes, that may be your steering wheel that we're seeing for the first 5 or 10 minutes, but then we're not going to lose anything when you get out of the car and you have to jump into action. I'll be candid, our compliance with that has not been where we want it to be. We've had some close calls and some very critical incidents where the camera gets activated at the very last second. We've had other officers on critical instances, the camera hasn't been activated at all. So what I don't think we saw the magnitude of was the accountability piece. And it's not as simple as saying, oh, well, you didn't activate your camera. It's understanding, what your accountability processes may be for discipline and all that. Those things are usually already built out. Make sure that you have those ready, that you can, deal with a failure to use technology. But more on the end of you're amassing so much data, you can't just go through as a human being and do accountability. You need tools. You need data integration tools that will maybe compare your body-worn activation data with your CAD data, which is a tool that we use to see, hey, wait a second, how did you run 10 calls today? You activated your camera once. There may be some nuances to that, but more often than not, what the data shows us is where we need to target our accountability. And our accountability is very progressive and starts with counseling, to written counseling and training well before we ever get to discipline. So that has probably been the biggest struggle for us, is how to spin up the technology piece to be able to have accountability. We do routine checks every use of force. We check, you have to review the video, the sergeant and lieutenant, and then ultimately the commander. So that's been a piece where for anybody that's ever gotten, we call it a use of force report, right? When an officer has gotten into a fight or an arrest situation that used force, and you look at the fill in the blank document and you read the police report and you go, okay, it looks good to me. And with the body worn camera, that's been a game changer where we go, whoa, not that the two don't match, but all of a sudden you might say, hey, was that force appropriate or not? Because it's not just what you're reading, it's what you're seeing, what you're hearing. Have to be absolutely real about that camera is one perspective, and it doesn't, smell and hear and perceive everything that a police officer does. But it is a different perspective, and it's given us a lot of ability. When I was a district commander, and we've had body worn for about 5 years now. I was a district commander from like 15 to 2019, and I watch an incident and with my lieutenant say, hey, maybe this thing crossed the line, but it's pretty close. Let's do something about it right now. Let's have a conversation. Let's sit with an officer and review it. Let's sit with the supervisor. And now in a much more timely manner, you don't have to wait to find out down the road that maybe there's an evolving problem. You can address training right away. And that part of it, I think, has been one of the greatest takeaways. Tom, I'll just leave there and we can keep going with the conversation, but that's been my initial kind of take over the last few years.
No, I'm glad you brought up the nexus with the technology and compliance, because it's a topic we could do a whole session, of course, on compliance, but how you utilize it, especially with the volume of cameras and officers that you have, that I think you could apply that to any size agency and utilize it where it can be more than obviously discipline. It comes down to training, but an actual tangible, here's what it should be and why it isn't. So no, that's great. I appreciate it. Elliot, why don't you give us your overview of your experiences, observations with body worn camera, and what you'd like your audience to hear about, where you think it's going to.
Well, I think we have a session on compliance, and if not, we have a webinar that we just recorded on compliance. But yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. We go back a few years and we were just talking about the camera itself and, what could it capture? How easy was it to turn on and off? How easy was it to upload? And then we, 3 years ago, we were more talking about the Bluetooth capability and how we can use cell phones or devices that the officer carries or has in the cruiser to do some of the administrative work around the body-worn camera. 2 years ago, we were talking more about automated redaction tools or body-worn camera CAD integration. Somewhat more last year, how that body-worn camera and CAD integration or body-worn camera RMS integration leads to digital evidence integration. This year we have a new generation of cameras coming out that have many new features, like the ability to live stream, GPS tagging and GPS tracking. There are various situational awareness tools that go with the GPS tracking so you can see where your officers are and who's on calls. There are some gunshot detection and report writing tools that have just come out. And as Chief Patil mentioned, some tools to help with video auditing. So, and there's always ongoing discussion about the ethics of facial recognition and object recognition and how to use other analytic tools to get more information out of the data that comes with the video cameras. So this is constantly evolving. And as you said, the story tomorrow may be different than the story today, or at least a month from now, it may be very different as the technology evolves.
Great, thanks, Elliot. Let's do that little discussion, Director Reyes. I know you could take the whole session from your experiences, and it would be fascinating, but can you give us a little mini case study from all the experiences you've had, from foundation to policy to implementation to sustainability, and how technology factors into all of this with body-worn camera?
Yeah, so I'd like to start with, I think, one of the biggest myths that exists with body-worn camera programs, and that is most smaller agencies. I know that Dinesh talked earlier about how the larger agencies, for the most part, typically have the budget to, consider and deploy a body-worn camera program. But as we know, if you look at the IACP studies and their audits, most police departments across the country are small police departments, 25 members or so. And, when you talk about a body-worn camera with an agency that's got 25 personnel, that can be a high ticket item to consider. But what I would offer as the myth is for those agencies that say, well, we can't afford body-worn cameras, it's too expensive. I always immediately put up, what if you have a Ferguson in your city and you're faced with lawsuits and all kinds of other issues that typically come with those very big scale events? Then all of a sudden, your body-worn camera could be your saving grace in a lawsuit. So to me, a myth, there's so many ways of implementing a body-worn camera program. You just have to get over that myth that you can't afford it. And so for those agencies that are constantly pushing that as the reason why they can't deploy a program, cost should not be the reason, because a program will dwarf in cost compared to lawsuits and other things down the road. So just think about that. The second thing I would just offer up next is when you're going to implement a program, the two programs that I've been a part of, I think most agencies tend to underestimate the size of the program. They'll say, oh, well, pick so-and-so or that person's good for that. And then they kind of slim down on the size of the team that's going to deploy a program. A program for any size agency is really going to be complex, or can be complex, and you can't really underestimate the number of resources that are going to be detailed to this project. Usually it'll be led by a project leader, like what I was in Alexandria, but I was just really one of 10 or 15 people that were putting our project together. And it's got to be internal, external, other resources that have done deployments already. I mean, you've got to really reach out far and wide in your team deployment because, and especially as Elliot was talking about earlier, how these new technologies can get very complex, and they're only getting complex by the day. It really is going to take a large team to deploy it. But really, I harp on this a lot because it's my favorite. It's the thing that I like to work on the best, because I've seen that the programs that fail because they have a bad policy. And so my favorite part of any body-worn camera program is the policy. If you focus and spend the majority of your time on your policy, it will address all your other tentacles of the program. And so if you take anything away from what I'm saying here today, is don't underestimate your potential, your capability to deploy a program. If you want to do it, you can do it. There's all kinds of programs, either through BJA, through this organization here, CNA, with all the subject matter experts, there are options and solutions for deploying a program. And number two is focus on your policy with a large team, and that'll only ensure a successful deployment. I think that's where I want to stop for now, Tom, to allow the other panel members, and then we'll dive in a little bit deeper beyond that.
It sounds good, Eddie. And I'm assuming just from what you just highlighted, you're promoting the importance of keeping your policy reviews fluid, updated, ever-changing, and
yeah, they
on the
should
rate.
be no different. Yeah, they should be no different, Tom, than any other policy. For example, if you're a CALIA accredited organization or an accredited agency just through your own state, there's going to be standards for policy review. Most are 2 to 3 years, but I would recommend that you do not go beyond 3 years on a policy review. Even if you have a brick house of a policy, it should still be reviewed at a minimum at the 3-year benchmark, but preferably at the 2-year benchmark.
Very good. Thank you, sir. We're going to do our best to address questions when they come in, which is what we should be doing. So this question came from an agency in New Jersey, and I'll turn it to Chief Patil. And the question is, in regards to the CAD system integration, do the agencies run their own dispatch for that to work? We don't run dispatch. Our dispatch is run by the county, and we run different program than the CAD information is pushed out for calls for service. So Dinesh, can you tackle that one, please?
Yeah, and I want to build on something that Eddie just said. You really got to, and not that you have to have this entire machine around you to stand up body worn. You can do it in smaller levels for sure, and maybe there's an opportunity in this new reimagined world of ours, to do buying consortiums and different things, to be able to have the power, to maybe get bigger agency pricing by agencies maybe coming together and somehow being able to cook a deal. When I think about our body worn infrastructure of people, I have a tech support team that's probably about 10 people or so, where I just do mobile field technology. I have 2 redaction contractors that all they do is redact and then produce video for us when we need it. I have a person whose full-time job is our a body worn accountability, and she's very much a data person. And then we have at least a couple of people that are data engineers. And so that gets me to the point where I am now, where we were very fortunate that I've got a database guy that I routinely go, hey man, I need this database and this database. I need you to cross-reference. And I sent him something the other day. It was fairly simple for somebody that does it, and literally within minutes, he took our telestaff staffing data and like our body armor list, and was able to put it together and give me what I needed literally within minutes. Not everybody's going to have that capability. So we take our, we have a Motorola P1 CAD, which I bring that up from the standpoint, not to make a Motorola commercial at all, but like, yeah, I think the newer or more recent generations CADs that you have, the better data you'll get out of it. Our old CAD, we didn't get good data, but we take a data dump out of that CAD, and then we take the data out of our body-worn camera vendor from the back end, and our database guy is able to do his magic and make it come together. But what I have seen too is that these vendors have realized that this accountability piece and making it happen in an automated standpoint is something that agencies want. And we've seen the evolution. We're getting to launch our next generation camera in a couple of weeks, start deploying it to all of our officers. And I'll get to some thoughts I have about money and different things in a minute. But these vendors are seeing that, hey, this is something that agencies want, is to be able to do this type of accountability work. So they're offering it as a service. We have looked at it, but for our sake, it wasn't necessarily worth the money because we happen to have in-house staff that does database work and can do that. So I think the win there, as long as you can get a copy of your data, which hopefully you have anyway for information sharing through organizations like Lynx or Index or different things, that you have that stuff, then and maybe maybe it's contracting with somebody. So it's not necessarily you have to have a full-time staff, and maybe you can get a contractor to put a certain number of hours of work. Certainly, I would offer up whatever we've built in-house. I'm happy to, hopefully be able to share that because it's not private entity. But there's no way, even like what Eddie said, even with 25 cops, there's no way you could sit there and just look at all the videos and make sure everything's going the way it should. You need some automation to help you out.
Great. Appreciate that. And I want you to come back to the points that you mentioned before that you wanted to touch on, but let's ask Eddie a question. I think,
Excuse me, Tom?
Go ahead, Elliot.
I'd like to just add a few more things to answer the question. There's going to be the technical issues of whether your CAD and the BWC system can talk to each other either through a direct feed or through the data or through a data dump, some sort of data extract file. But the really key thing is the cooperation of the county in either making the feed happen, doing the data extracts, and potentially making some changes to the data feed or the data structures to best accommodate it. So really, it's going to be that relationship between your agency and the county that is going to determine what can be done. Because the other things, whether it's a direct feed or a data dump, that can usually be addressed. The technical issues can be addressed. It's really the cooperation that's going to be the key factor.
Great, thanks, Elliot. I'm glad you've chimed in on that. It's a good point. Let me just ask Director Reyes this, and this is something that relates from my experience when I was a detective. There wasn't anything more important than chain of custody with evidence, the standards that we had to follow. And Eddie, you're recognized as a national leader in law enforcement IT. Can you talk about ethical considerations that the audience should be aware of? We've heard the term digital ethics being used, policy side, and the importance of having a really sound foundation with your body-worn camera program when it comes to chain and all tied to technology. So can you touch on that for us, Eddie?
Thank you for that, Tom. Boy, the question is spot on, Tom. I can't think of a time where ethics in law enforcement has been under the scrutiny of a magnifying glass like it is today. I talk about back in the day when a police officer would testify on the stand, and that person could testify against three others saying something totally opposite, and a judge would typically believe the police officer. Now it's almost the exact opposite. Three police officers could be up on the stand saying something, and a citizen says something different, and the courts typically believe the sole and the lone citizen. And so because of the dynamics that we're in today, and especially in the law enforcement culture, ethics, not only at the human level, but at the technical level, have to be at their highest level right now for any organization. And all the technology that we're talking about here, whether it's a CAD system or whether it's a records management system or a body-worn camera system, the technology typically is capable of delivering some very high ethical standards with the equipment. Timestamps, personnel stamps, anytime somebody touches a record or transfers a file, there's date and time stamps and name stamps associated with all that. But again, that requires human attention and human intervention to make sure that all the technical, ethical pieces that are supposed to be working in the background are in fact working, because all it'll take is for someone to lose focus and attention to the ethical standards that are built into the technology. And the minute that there's a simple error, whether it's technical or human, if it's tainted, then it could potentially taint all the cases that are around that period. So what's at stake here is very high. It has to be at the highest level, similar to, turning in drugs or drug money. It's got to be at that level. Accountability, and verification on a regular basis. Because the minute it fails at any one of those places, it has the potential of compromising lots of cases and lots of police work that went into other cases. So that's what's at stake.
Thanks, Eddie. Appreciate that response and highlighting the importance of it. Dinesh, and I think Elliot, I want you to also comment on this question. You both touched on it, but without going into brand or vendor specifics, from your experiences and more importantly, what your expectations might be, lessons learned that we can expect with new generation camera rollout, from live streaming to GPS tracking, CAD, RMS integration, report writing, all those things. So asking you a little bit to predict the future, but that's what you're good at. So go ahead. Dinesh, we'll start with you.
All right, thanks, Todd. So our, like I said, next generation camera that we're deploying, we're not necessarily going to activate all these features, but just the state of affairs of where we are now comes with GPS capability, both from the standpoint where you know, you can, your video can have the metadata of GPS, you know, as well as you know, capability if you also include a 4G, you know, SIM card, to be able to then, you know, use GPS from a tracking standpoint. We're not activating those features at the moment. Again, very strong union environment. We have to bargain kind of everything we do, but gunshot detection is included. I went to the range one day, and I, of course, new guy, you know, my tech folks gave me the camera to play with, and I always love new gear, and hadn't quite read all the instructions just yet, and I couldn't understand why my camera kept activating at the range. And then, you know, a couple of minutes, I'm a complete idiot, started figuring out that that was one of the features that I knew we had. I just didn't know we had turned it on. For me, they turned everything on apparently, and so you know, that piece of it is there. There's certainly activation capability with you know, removing your gun from the holster. There's, you know, activating your lights in the car. There's been some hurdles with that technology with our vendor, that the activating you know, with your lights on in the car was actually activating everybody within the range. And so we, again, something we haven't jumped onto because we want to have individual control over our cameras, because there are times where you are allowed to turn them off if you're talking about tactics, or you're interviewing a particular type of victim, or certain things. So they're evolving technologies. Some stuff's already here. Again, going back to Eddie's point, what's your policy, what's your ethics, how are you going to use this stuff? Because now in this world of really rich enhanced data, you know, you have to think of several steps, I think, down the pike to understand what the implication be. What are you picking up with your camera that you don't realize, right? One of the things that drives me a little nutty, I've got between 15-year-olds and an 11-year-old. It's usually the 11-year-old is walking around the house, and she's invited somebody into her house electronically, and I don't always know that. So we've had to have talks about, listen, you're FaceTiming somebody, but I didn't choose to FaceTime them. So, you know, what are we doing also is we're capturing information. What space we go into some of the most sensitive spaces of people's lives, and we have to be good stewards of that information. And so for me, from a cyber standpoint, going with a proven cloud-based vendor that, you know, hopefully has the best and brightest working on, or at least their cloud provider, on securing this data, we have a massive responsibility as stewards of this information. You know, anything from a police report right to people's darkest secrets to the video that we captured in some of their worst moments of their lives. I think that you know, GPS technology, it always drives us to you know, what more can we do with that? And so I think there's a big officer safety component there. You know, I know that there's a vendor who's looking at how you can use camera technology, and this isn't a stretch, right? Because we do this stuff today, you know, QR codes and everything else, but how, you know, holding a driver's license in front of your camera while you're taking a report, and your camera now captures the data and dumps it into your report. I don't think it's pie in the sky. I don't think it's ready for prime time yet, but these things are coming. I think, how can your camera, when I look at, I know I keep seeing these Subarus and they have two cameras in the headliner of the car. And I think about, you know, these are all technologies that will slow your car down, or, you know, bring you awareness from what's going around you. So also, how can the body cam potentially tell you what's going on, maybe detect a threat that you couldn't detect? And I think as we get into artificial intelligence, and I remember going to a seminar one time, and I think it was Microsoft, and they're saying, oh, well, look at this. Our camera can figure out what a dog is, by looking at a picture. And you go, holy smoke. As that data is growing exponentially in ways we can't even process right now, right? Our human mind can't even, well, maybe smarter people can, but like really quantify how quickly artificial intelligence is learning and putting those pieces together. What if, and this gets into that little bit of, a sci-fi deal here, but you're wearing a camera, you have a set of glasses on, and you don't see a guy with a gun in the bushes, but your camera does. What other sensors, we're talking about just audio and video, what other sensors either can be worn and integrated into a solution where, again, enhances your safety or efficiency, or do body-worn cameras start including sensor technology that, again, will help you be safe? Maybe it's a natural, maybe it's natural gas, maybe it's fentanyl that it can detect somehow. I think the moment we stepped off the ledge and started putting this technology on our bodies, right? We had to get over that hurdle. I remember Elliot was talking a few minutes ago about, hey, we were trying to figure out how the tech would work. Well, we're kind of past the idea of like, okay, now the camera's on, and I figured out that if you use the right mount, you can get in a fight and it'll still stay on. It uploads every day, like everything's working basically, right? Now what's the next generation of how can you adapt all these different technologies in a world that frankly seems to be getting more dangerous every day? I'm really hopeful that this is something that can kind of jump us to the next level, because maybe the camera 5 or 10 years from now is the least interesting part of the technology that you're wearing. It's really body worn, and then ... what comes after that.
Good. Thank you, Chief. And we only have 2 minutes left. So what I want to do is go around to the panel and just ask an open-ended question. And Elliot, I'm going to start with you. What you want the audience to know about technology, and keeping in mind that we have various sizes of agencies in our audience. Some don't have the capacity to have the staff or dedicated technology crew that the Chief and Director Reyes have, and what you would like them to know about technology as we wrap up the meeting related to body worn. Elliot, let's start with you.
Well, I think the key thing, bouncing off the last comments from Director Reyes and Chief Patil, are that your policies and the ethics of the technology may be more important than the technology capabilities. I mean, some of the technologies that Chief Patil mentioned as pie in the sky are in use elsewhere in the world, but they're not, the American public just won't stand for it. In the UAE, they're using infrared body camera helmets that are detecting when people have fevers, and anyone with a fever is immediately thrown into quarantine. In China, they're using body cameras with facial recognition that are finding people wanted for crimes against the state, and they're being thrown into jail when being spotted at a soccer game or out and about. But those are technologies that the American people would not stand for, and our ethics just don't play to. Most of these technologies, I mean, even the storage, which is the most expensive cost of the whole system, when you look at where that storage cost was just 5 years ago, it's a fraction, a small fraction of where it was. And the costs, as Eddie points out, the costs are far exceeded by the benefits. And our study in Las Vegas shows that dramatically, that the cost of processing complaints, the cost of the fact that so many complaints are reduced because you take a quick look at the video, or the complainant takes a quick look at the video and sees their perceptions at the time may not have been accurate based on the stress that they were under at the time, giving them the benefit of the doubt that it was a well-meaning complaint. So those protections alone, far exceed the cost of the cameras and the storage, but you have to have the base budget to deal with that. It will save you money in the long run in most cases, but it's the procedures, the policies, and the ethics to make sure that the camera and the surrounding tools are doing what you need them to do, that is really, really key to making the program successful.
Thanks, Elliot. Chief, let's go to you. Final closing comments, considerations, and I'm told that we can go a little longer, so I might follow up with a question or two, but go ahead with your wrap up for the audience, Chief, what you'd like to leave them with for this session.
I think Eddie said it best. Is you know it's on. I'm not quoting it probably, but yeah, it's too expensive. I think not to go down this road. I would certainly offer don't overbuy a system, but don't underbuy it either. Like our vendor has all sorts of different packages you can get, and we've elected to say, okay, you know what, we're not ready for all that yet. But a good, solid, durable system, cloud-based, safe. Easy to use if you're we keep adding stuff on the cops right now more than ever. It's just add, and if you can make their life a little bit easier, be flexible with your policy, be able to say, hey, we had a laundry, like literally a list that was this long of all these different categories you had to tag your video with. And we finally said, what are we getting out of that? And well, we were making life harder on the cops. So literally a couple of weeks ago, after almost a year's worth of analysis, we've chopped that list down, by a huge amount, with the idea, let's make it easier. We're trying to get cell phones in our hands, the cop to be able to tag the videos easier and get compliance through also helping them. But it occurred to me, I've been watching, like all of you have, in bits and pieces probably, what's going on in Wisconsin. And there's an article, there's several actually, it talks about how they've been putting off the implementation of a body-worn camera program for years now. They've been talking about it. Well, I don't know all the ins and outs. I'm making no judgment about what happened there because unfortunately we only have a minute part of the equation for what happened in that shooting, but potentially it may not have completely stemmed the tide of what's going on out there, but we have had incidents here. We've had several often involved shootings this year for, I don't know why, but we have. In one in particular, it was, we were able to put the video out within a couple of days. And most people, were like, oh, okay. We had our first body-worn camera officer involved shooting we had. We have another jurisdiction that does our state's attorney review. And within a day of watching the body-worn camera, they turned around and they're like, we're declining the case. Like there's nothing wrong, it's totally justified. We literally didn't know what to do with that because we've never had a state's attorney turn it around so quick. So we're all facing a budget crisis. We're all facing redefining priorities. And I think what I'm hopeful of is that there will be federal funding for agencies that may struggle a little bit. I will say, Eddie and I have worked on a LINKS program, which is an information sharing program for years now. And as we've moved into a posture with that program of agencies having to pay for it themselves, I don't want a chief to make a decision between putting gas in a police car or buying a police car that year in a small agency versus having an information sharing tool that could keep their community safe. So I'm hopeful that there will be support now out of all the chaos. There will be some positivity here. We're in a crisis for hiring. Our whole profession is in turmoil at the moment, but there's light at the end of the tunnel, and I think body-worn cameras is a way to get there. So the other thing I'll wrap with this on this particular topic is reach out to any of us that have been in the middle of it, have been doing it for a while, that would be more the early adopters that learn the hard way, and then just figure out a way to make it happen. We're cops, that's what we do. We make stuff happen. And but to read this now that they've been talking about it for 3 years out there, and maybe they weren't getting the funding and the support from their elected officials, but I guarantee I'm sure at the top of the list of what's going to be happening now. And 2 people I think were killed last night and another one shot in the riots. By a bad guy. If you can stem the flow or the tension or head it off, it's too expensive not to do it. So that's what I got, Tom.
No, that's great, Chief. I'm so glad that you mentioned the importance of peer exchange and sharing information. That's the one thing that I think is one of the most pivotal outcomes of this body-worn camera TTA program, is agencies are turning to each other more than ever. I appreciate you mentioning that. A quick question for you, Chief, that came in, and then I'll turn it over to Eddie to wrap us up, is the accountability person that you mentioned. Does that have to be a sworn officer? Should be a civilian? And if sworn, should they be assigned to professional standards? So your input on that.
So I think so. I would say this about her in the most affectionate way. She's a nerd and she's great at it. So you just have to have the right person. I think we are very blessed in policing that we have a wide variety of skill sets. So I think it's a matter of if you can go out and hire the right person. That's a data nerd. I consider myself a nerd. Google, Facebook, the nerds one. If anybody hasn't figured that out. So, if you have we got to hire these positions when the budget was better, right? It was maybe even good. And people understand it. We did it over years that we roll this out. But today, if you had to have an accountability person in the budgets that we're facing, you might have to grab a cop. It's certainly better if somebody has a capability or an inherent capability of analyzing data. But I always go back to cops are problem solvers, get somebody that's got a good head on their shoulders. If you can't afford to go, to get someone. And then, we house that person under our professional accountability division, which is something new our new chief has created, because we do realize there's so many different accountability things with an agency our size. It is sometimes difficult because we were decentralizing that capability to make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. But anything from our monthly information security training, all the way to body worn compliance, everything in between training, that we needed an accountability team. So that's what we're working on building out right now.
It's perfect. And we've heard that feedback before, and no matter the size of the agency, have somebody who's a go-to who knows the program inside and out, especially in these trying times with budget. So Director Reyes, final words of wisdom that you'd like the audience to hear from you before we turn it back to Monique.
Well, Tom, I think in closing, what I would just like to leave those that are, and obviously those that are with us on this webinar, are people that are part of the BJA grant process and are very well underway to considering a body-worn camera. And so what I would say is, don't be afraid to fail, be afraid to try. My biggest piece of advice that I could leave you in parting is that we've all stumbled in our deployments along the way. But that hasn't stopped us from moving on. You're going to stumble. You're going to have some tough days, but don't be afraid of failure. Be afraid of not trying and being successful. Because at the end of the day, like the example that was given earlier by Dinesh, if the organization in Wisconsin did not have a body-worn camera program running during their event, I guarantee you right now, somebody's job is probably on the line saying, why did we not have our camera program up and running? And don't get caught up in one of those situations where you have your Ferguson event in your municipality and your program was on a piece of paper gathering dust on somebody's desk. Don't be afraid to fail. Be afraid to try.
It's great closing statements, Eddie. Appreciate it. Yeah, very much. And I want to just thank you all. I have probably 17 other questions prepared to ask you. So the fact that we had this great discussion, I hope the audience got as much out of it as I did. Know that these experts are available at your fingertips if you have additional questions to turn to for them. And also know that the TTA website encompasses a lot of what we discussed today.